Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Autistic Tidbits and Tangents. Today, we're joined by Pete Wharmby from the UK, and we're going to be talking about special interests primarily, but obviously, since this is the home of all the tangents, we will probably be going off. So welcome, Pete. We're so glad to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very glad that we've managed to arrange this, and yeah, it's great to have an opportunity to talk about autistic stuff, and special interests in particular, and hopefully a few good tangents. I love a good tangent, I really do.
And all from 3 different time zones as well.
Yes.
Indeed, yes. Yeah. Just to keep things nice and complicated for 3 people who probably have considerable executive dysfunction.
Welcome to Autistic Tidbits and Tangents.
Candid conversations between autistic off-hour professionals.
Cool. Potential trigger warnings for this episode include discussions of ableism, general mentions of trauma, conspiracy theories, the incel community, Holocaust, and 9/11. Today, we are joined by Pete Wharmby from the UK. And so we are in 3 countries today, 3 different time zones, which is... it's made scheduling a little bit interesting, but we've managed to pull it through.
We certainly have.
Welcome, Pete.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much for having me. And it's been interesting trying to get the times to sync up, but it's always worth it in the end. I'm glad we've managed to.
Me too. I've followed you for years and have always learned so much from you. So I'm really glad to have you here, another autistic teacher. And you're an author too, a recent author as well.
I am, yeah. I mean, I don't know whether it counts yet until the publication day. I almost feel like I can't say that until it's real, until it's popped out. And
this is airing a week after it comes out, so technically by then you are a published author, and you have a second book coming too.
I do, yes. That'll be. Sorry.
I really get those thoughts. Like, even if you finished a project like that, you're still like, I'm not really an author yet. It's not proper. But at the same time, and someone else told me this. I'm obviously just finishing my second book as well. I think we're all authors here, which is pretty cool. But someone told me at one point that, even if you're not published, and even if you're not published through a traditional publishing house, you still made all that effort to finish a book. And that by itself is a victory, and damn hard when you have executive functioning difficulties.
It really is. Yes, it really is. I mean, honestly, issues with deadlines and, prioritizing tasks and that kind of, those kind of really big tasks like writing a book, that can span months and months and months, does not go very well with my particular blend of executive dysfunction. It's been a challenge, but it's done. Well, I mean, they're both done. They're both finished. They're just in the final stages now of that kind of post-production kind of work that books go through. So I mean, the first one will all about special interests, which we're going to focus on today, and then the second one in March next year is more a kind of general book about autism generally. It's a bit like my threads that I do on Twitter just turned into a book, just kind of expanded upon quite considerably, obviously. So that's the future book.
I look forward to having you back for that one, and I look forward to being able to point my clients in that direction.
Because, for sure.
Yes.
There is so much. There is a need for autistically produced content for parents and young people out there, and
there really is. It's still the case where I think a lot of people who start exploring the world of autism, whether for themselves or for their family or friends, they're still, I think, signposted immediately to things written by non-autistic people. I think that is still very much the case. It's changing. There is signs of that shifting, but I'm not going to be happy until until that's pretty much gone.
To be fair, I'm not. I don't want to diss any of the work that's done by non-autistic professionals. There are some great books out there. There are some great websites. There are some really, really wonderful non-autistic educators out there. But there is this sense that, our voices have been taken from us for so many years. And even for those of us who, it's not like we're old, or I don't feel like my particular voice was ever taken from me. But then reading books like Neurotribes, I was crying for my people, and I've never had an experience like that, really feeling connected to so many people that I've never met, but there's a history of oppression, and we're just starting to break that. Personally, for me, it's autism and ADD. Kara,
same.
Is it? Yeah.
Autism, and ADHD.
Pete, yeah. And Pete, do you have a plus as well?
Well, I think I do. I'm at the moment self-diagnosed with ADHD, but I'm only because I'm waiting for the referral, because the NHS is basically ground to a halt with this kind of thing. So I've been waiting for 2 years now, I think, which is a long time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, very long time. Especially for someone with, no patience. So it's been a struggle, but I certainly look at everything through that lens now. I certainly feel like I've got this kind of clash in my head of these two, often quite different imperatives going on, with autism on one hand, ADHD on the other. It's an interesting way to live.
Sometimes they counteract each other quite nicely, and sometimes not at all,
Exactly, yes.
It's quite fun. I don't remember if I've already told this, but I was doing a Venn diagram of autism and ADHD with a friend of mine who's also an autistic psychologist. And it was so weird, because we were having so much trouble actually placing things in only one of the two categories. And at the same time, they are very opposite in some ways. And it's just so confusing, but So, but it is a kind of a double up on the executive challenges. So it does make it kind of impressive that we're making this work.
It does. I think it's worthy of congratulations from someone. I think it's pretty impressive that we've managed it.
We should do an executive dysfunction award show someday.
We should, if we could get it organized.
All right. So the topic for today was, it's intended to be special interests. And obviously, there are so many angles to really go at this from. But one of the first things that Kara and I both thought of was how special interests can really both be a strength and a career path for so many of us. And very often it's ignored, and it's talked about in more of a sense of like, oh, that's an autistic obsession. That's like something we have to steer the kids away from. They have to be able to do other things. I think many of us actually turn it into something quite profoundly strong in our lives and a driving force. So,
What are your thoughts on that, Pete?
Well, I'm a great believer in it myself. I think that this idea that special interests can be a catalyst, for career choices, for making our way in the world, for being able to live independent lives. I think very often it can be very, very strongly associated. But as you say, there is a problem that we tend to get them stamped out of us at a very early age.
Yes.
I remember very vividly that when I was at school, I was the captain of the quiz team, which, as you can imagine, is like the coolest position. I was king
obviously.
of the jocks. But it was very interesting because we had to kind of work out what our specialisms were going to be, and it also kind of went into my history coursework that I was having to do too. And I was always a huge fan of the Titanic. I've always been really obsessed. I say obsessed, but I mean I have been. All my life I've been really interested in the Titanic. It's something that I've always found fascinating. And yet I felt at even the age of 17 or 18 that somehow it wasn't okay for me to indulge in that, and I had to choose something else, even though that was a kind of self-sabotaging move, obviously, because I knew so much about the Titanic, and I've kind of reflected on this over the years about why I did that, why that would be something that I would do. And I think it's because from a very early age I was made to believe, I think more by teachers than my parents, but perhaps both, I'm not sure, that these special interests of mine, these things I was really into, were somehow lesser and therefore didn't really count properly, if that makes sense. And that I needed to try to spread my wings, like you said, spread my horizons a little bit and look at other things, which led over the years, especially at school and at university, to me avoiding doing things that I really would have been very good at because they matched up with my interests, in favor of doing things that were kind of outside of my comfort zone, but also outside of my interest zone as well, which I'm not sure was really a very good move.
I wonder if it also speaks to, I'm going to make a generalization here, but the neurotypical tendency to be generalists and maybe be uncomfortable with people who know more, people who have expertise that is outside of their I don't want to say capabilities, but outside of their experiences. Yeah,
it's very possible. And I mean, I fully see it these days. I think it's a fairly benign form of internalized ableism that I just kind of absorbed from the people around me. That these things that I was so fixated on and so passionate about that I had to let them go. For some reason, I had to move on. I had to look at other things because it's unhealthy or strange in some way to have such dedicated passions.
Instead of a badge of honor or pride that so much about something.
Yeah. Exactly.
Is it a people-pleasing thing, do you think, that we look at other people's reactions to our special interests and we try to adapt to something that will make them less uncomfortable or will like us more, maybe? Or
I think so. I think so at times, certainly. I mean, I think like I said before we started recording, I'm a inveterate people please, so it's something that I'm really trying to get a handle on these days, because it's not very good for me. And that would make a lot of sense, that especially some of the things that I am interested in, people might find a little bit peculiar or unusual or boring. That's the key one, isn't it? People find it boring, so you can't tell them about it because you'll be judged as being a nerd or a geek or something like that. And exactly. And you don't want to admit it. I wrote a bit in my first book about how when I was at school, I was a big fan of those tabletop war game things, the little models, Warhammer, that you paint them up and they look beautiful and you fight with them. But I was very aware that there was a kind of split in the class, in my form. I was at an all boys school, would you believe, and there was this split in the class. There were a couple of kids who were cool with that kind of thing, but the rest of the class viewed it as being the worst of the worst, literally the just the most shameful thing anyone could be involved in. I remember they used to take garden spiders and fight them in this class like a break time, and that was somehow cooler and more acceptable than me painting model soldiers. That's the kind of environment we're talking about. Really strange. So I absorbed that and I held it to myself and I kept it secret. I didn't let on that I was into that kind of thing because I was terrified of the backlash. And when you're denying a huge part of your personality like that causes trauma. That's a really bad thing to be doing, especially when you're in your teens, when you're going through adolescence and everything's difficult anyway. So I think there is an element of, I don't want to let on that I'm into this, because I want these people to like me. I want these people to accept me, which is very difficult.
Of course. But there's a prerequisite here as well, though, because in order to make that adaptation, you first have to learn the consequences. And if it's okay for me to tell a very weird story.
Of course, always.
I spent a very few years in the modeling industry when I was a teenager. And I remember at one point, I had just gotten into tabletop role-playing games. And I had brought a book with me to one of my jobs, because there was always so many little breaks here and there where there wasn't anything for the model to do. So I would just be bored, right? So I brought a book because I was planning a character and yada, yada, yada. And I remember the makeup artist at one point asking me about this stuff. And it was only months later that one of my agents told me that, there was this person that had told them that I was talking about demons and like Satanist kind of stuff. And no, it was literally just, it was Vampire the Masquerade, the tabletop role-playing game from White Wolf.
To be specific.
There was nothing about demons. There was nothing about, religion or anything like that. But my problem obviously was being interested in something that was at the time not very mainstream. And at the same time, working in an industry where you had to be interested in only this.
Yes. Yeah.
And the social backlash. And for me, obviously, it did impact my career, which I didn't care because I wasn't actually interested in modeling, but my mother wanted me to be interested in it. I quit. Everything is good. But I'm just thinking how many people there might be out there that, they have a job or they are moving towards an education or getting into some kind of career. And then they say the wrong thing at the wrong time about an interest they have that doesn't match with where they are socially in that context.
And get a reputation. Yeah.
Getting a reputation or getting
a sense of shame.
Social and potentially financial consequences on the basis of that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a likelihood, if that were to be as bad as it could be, you could lose a job, you could lose a career, all because you're interested in something that somehow, your face doesn't fit, or the hobby doesn't fit, the interest doesn't fit. It's it's terrifying actually when you put it like that, and I think that is going to be something that is going to be happening,
it definitely is. Even just at psychology studies. I remember that one of the things that's was in my circle there, very hush, was if you're interested in serial killers or anything to do with criminal psychology, that sort of element, that's kind of creepy. Can we not talk about it?
Yeah.
So I shouldn't tell people that I have Zoom parties with some of my friends and we watch serial killer documentaries?
But we're studying psychology, guys. Yeah. It's an area of psychology.
Yeah. But it's not cool, or it's not the done thing, or it's not, there's the unwritten rules, isn't there? That you can't transgress, and if you do, then there will be consequences. We can't even tell you what they'll be because it's unwritten, but they will happen.
You will just suddenly be shunned.
Yes. Yeah. Brutally and for a very long time, if not forever. It's really, really difficult to negotiate. I mean, I think it must be impossible for people who aren't autistic. It must be very difficult to negotiate this. But for people, people who are autistic, it verges onto the completely impossible, totally not going to happen. You are going to misstep, and those missteps could be enormous, in their impact, which is devastating. I mean, but what you were saying about the tabletop role playing, it reminded me of I don't know whether you saw the last season of Stranger Things, where that
currently watching. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a big kind of plot point. I won't spoil it. I don't want to go into any spoilers, but but that whole kind of panic of Dungeons and Dragons, having that kind of element is a big feature. So it's and who'd predict that?
Yeah.
Who'd think that was likely to happen? Taking your book in to work for the day, thinking you're not going to think to yourself, oh, I better be careful just in case people think this of me, because why would you?
And because why would it have an impact on work in this career over here, that I have this completely other hobby over here that doesn't hurt anybody? But it does. And I think another tangent, it kind of ends up adding to social anxiety, doesn't it? Because it's one of those things where, when I do this thing that's wrong, and I don't know what it is that I've done wrong until I meet the consequences, sometimes months or years later. And then I have to somehow be able to anticipate my mistakes before I make them. And, it causes rumination. You lie awake at night thinking about social mistakes that you've made years ago.
A whole bunch just flashed through my head as soon as you said that. Oh my gosh.
I'm sorry. That's a bit of a trigger.
Trigger warning here.
But it ends up becoming traumatic.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not PTSD, but it's certainly a form of trauma, I think.
Yes.
They all add up.
I think so. I strongly believe that once you've experienced that once, especially as an autistic person who may well have quite a strong grasp of kind of patterns of behavior, even if you don't get why they're happening, you kind of notice the pattern. I think once that's happened once, that kind of unexpected backlash to something that you could never have predicted, then you live with that for the rest of your life, always expecting it to happen again, and the trouble is that is then fed quite heavily by it happening again every now and then, every few years it happens again. And, by the time you're in your 30s, you've probably experienced that 4 or 5 times, and you've got nowhere to put that trauma, and you can't turn it off, because the sad thing is you've been proven time and again that it will happen again, which makes it very difficult to, come to terms with and to, cast aside. It's very, very damaging, I think.
Absolutely.
Now, what about... So special interests can obviously be very adaptive. They can be positive things, but sometimes they can flip over and be things that are maladaptive, not so helpful to us. I was telling Maya before when we were brainstorming about this that I've always been really fascinated by humans in general. I think it's, I would watch movies and act things out in the mirror, and I got really into theater and psychology and all these things. But there was a period of time after I learned about the Holocaust, I'm 12 years old, reading every firsthand account I can, despite the fact that I found it really difficult and painful. And, my heart would race, all these things. But I felt like I needed to know, I needed to bear witness to the extent of human capacity for evil and harm to others. But so that's just one example, but I'm sure there are plenty of examples of how interests can also cause stress
in various ways, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think that kind of, exposing yourself to material that, though you're kind of fascinated by it, often in quite a, what's the word? Typical writer, word just gone. Kind of visceral way, you're deeply interested in it in a way that you can't quite put into words, but the content of it is actually deeply distressing to you, and and it's like it becomes this odd kind of feedback loop where you're indulging in it, but you're also, to put it mildly, upsetting yourself, terribly by doing so. And I mean, I recognize that a little bit with my with my Titanic experience. I've got a bit of a fascination with pretty much any kind of disaster that you can think of.
Yes.
You know, and some of them have been harrowing to the point where I had to purposefully stop myself from looking into it, you know, because it was just too. I remember, and this needs a trigger warning bigger than anything I can imagine. I remember there was a time where 9/11 was something that I just couldn't shake. I was something about the enormity of it, you know, and just the vastness of that moment being so horrific. It got me down a particular rabbit hole that I really did not want to go down. That all I'm going to say is it ended in some images, you know, online, which I ended up, you know, almost accidentally looking at. And to this day, I regret that.
Can't get them out of your head. I know. Yeah.
Once you've seen them, you never lose them. And yeah, that was. Again, a bit like you said about bearing witness, it was, I needed to know. There was part of me that just felt it had to know. And I don't know why, especially for something that, you know, had no personal impact on me. You know, I don't have any links with that event whatsoever. And yet there I was looking at images that, you know, haunt me today. Which I desperately wish I had never seen. So yeah, I think that can happen. I also think that special interests, if they are of a particular type, can also have kind of physical or even lifestyle issues attached to them. I mean, you know, if you have a special interest in I'll just use an example that I've verged in the past, a special interest of a video game which involves quite a lot of money being spent on it, for example, you might find yourself in financial problems, you know, or something like that. You know, it can kind of be prioritized to the detriment of other aspects of your life, perhaps. And the same with the time investment that you're willing to put in too. You know, sometimes I've prioritized an interest, you know, above other things that really did need to be done, you know, and would have benefited from that time. So yeah, there's definitely a number of ways where things can kind of spiral in a negative way. There's
also, I've experienced personally kind of an overlap with my physical health in various ways. So it's kind of a funky combination, because in many ways I have pretty good interoception, but in other ways it's just not there. And after I moved out of my parents' or my mom's apartment, I was living by myself for some years, and I love dancing. And I ended up, because I basically didn't have a lot to do most of the time, and I wasn't being very social, and I wasn't getting out, because I finally had my own cave that was mine and I could just stay in there forever and ever. It's the most wonderful thing, but it's dangerous. It's dangerous. I ended up dancing so much that I actually caused damage to my feet and legs that is, you know, I still can suffer from a lot of pain. And so I think even if your child, or even if you have a very, you know, physically healthy special interest like dancing or other types of sports, it's so important to have that framework around you where someone is looking after your physical health and making sure that you're doing your stretching, that you're taking breaks, that you're eating right to support all of that physical work that you're doing. So like even really healthy or, you know, good interests that you would think this can't possibly be harmful. Sometimes, even if we're smart adults, you know, it goes badly and we end up hurting ourselves.
Literally.
Literally.
As somebody who, for whatever reason, and I think it's because I'm terribly clumsy individual, I don't really have any physical special interests other than I do like walking, you know, like long walks in the countryside. So I've never really given that any thought, but that's very definitely a thing, isn't it? Where, you know, you can overexert yourself, you know, obviously you can go too far. And that's a very, very good point, actually. Yeah.
And I know we certainly all have the tendency to hyper focus, and sometimes you lose sight, you don't eat, you don't go to the washroom, you don't do all these things, and suddenly 14 hours has gone by and
you forget to sleep.
What?
Yeah. And I think this is actually something that Obviously, the young people don't come to me themselves with that question, but their parents will. And they'll be like, my teenager is staying up all night. They're not going outside ever. They're not, eating. They're not drinking. They're not taking care of their hygiene. They're not, doing all of the things to actually take care of their physical health. So it's not that the computer game is a problem. It's that the time investment and the lack of being able to take breaks when you actually physically need to, that can become an issue.
And unfortunately, often the response is then, well, let's just ban the special interest. And then you're robbing that child of the one thing that makes them relax potentially. And the one time of day.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for saying that.
And not teaching structure, right? Like they will never learn how to regulate the interest if you just ban it. Because if someone were to say to me, you can never have ice cream again, guess what? If I was ever at a party and there was ice cream, I'd be eating all the ice cream. Like I would not know how to pace myself because I'm not allowed it.
Well, I touched on that in my first book where I talked about a period of my life where my girlfriend at the time, and this was before I had a diagnosis, was really fed up with me playing video games, as I think is probably quite a common story worldwide, And in a moment of, really trying to do the right thing, I sold my Xbox, and all my games. I just went, okay, I'm going to, without realizing how
that's heartbreaking.
Initially, everything was fine. But as time moved on, and I didn't have anything to replace that kind of downtime, it became very clear to me that I needed those games as a way of de-stressing after a day in the classroom, a day of kind of hyper social activity in the class with the kids and other teachers. I needed to go home and play Red Dead Redemption, for the first one, for a few hours. I needed to. And that was a very, very difficult time in my life where, I genuinely thought I was doing the right thing and putting a relationship first and, doing it properly. But I think genuinely it ended up in me, having quite considerable problems, mental health wise, because suddenly I had no
outlet,
safety belt, no outlet. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
It's also that cave,
it is the cave.
And I say this to everyone I talk to who's getting into a relationship or thinking about moving in with someone.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that you're able to have a cave sometimes. It doesn't have to be every day necessarily. It doesn't have to be all day. It's not that you shouldn't be social. It's not that you shouldn't prioritize your relationship. But an autistic person or an introvert even, and very possibly many, many other people need that cave. And what I've actually done, relationship advice, what I do with my husband is we will make sure that there are days throughout the month where I'm not home or he's not home, and we have an evening to ourselves. And we just have the entire house to ourselves. And our house is actually pretty big. And like I have a sports room in the basement. I can just go down and dance for however long my feet will let me, and he won't be bothered by it. But it's not enough. Because he's still home.
They're there. Yeah, they're there. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's this kind of I talk about it with this weird metaphor. Maybe it doesn't translate well for everybody, but I kind of think of people as having bubbles around them. And whenever someone is home, their bubble pushes on mine a little bit.
Yes.
And sometimes that's comfortable, and sometimes you want that. But sometimes you also just need to not have pressure on your bubble. Just let it take up the entire place and just be by yourself. And it goes with teens as well who are still living at home. The reason they're in that room, in their own room with the closed door all the time, is that bubble. It's exactly.
Yep. And if someone interrupts it, it's like you have to reset and start again.
Yes. Exactly. Completely start over.
And I think that's another reason why it's good to be completely alone, because you remove that likelihood of happening. Because even if you're trying to give each other space in the house, there's every chance that they might just come in and say, "Oh, have you seen such and such? Where are the scissors?"
Or
something like
or
that.
even the wonderful question, "What would you like for dinner?"
Indeed, yes.
Even the most helpful of questions, even the most well-intended, it just bursts that bubble, and you have to build it back and start all over. And
I think this is why so many of us and my students talk about they do their best work in the wee hours of the morning. Like, we're not good sleepers in general, but often it's because this is a time there's less sensory stimulation, there's less social engagement, and you can just like be quiet.
Yeah. And at the same time, for those of us with anxiety, do not trust anything your brain tells you after like 9 or 10 p.m.
Yes,
great tip.
Just don't. So it's, and I think I've met very few autistic people who are morning people. Most of us tend to be night owls, and there is that tendency to like stay up and do all the useful things late at night, and very probably until like 2 or 3, 4 a.m. But it comes with that caveat of like, your brain is still tired.
Yes. Yeah.
You still have to look out for the consequences of having your alone time at that time of day. Which obviously becomes an impact.
It does. I mean, I've got a bit of a double thing happening there. I do the late night thing. I go to bed long after everybody else does, so that I've got that time. And that's when most of my writing gets done, to be honest. But I also really like the early mornings. Again, because of the stillness and the quiet, there's no time apart from possibly a Sunday. It's only where I live anyway, where the world is so kind of quiet and calm as 7 in the morning, 6 in the morning. So my sleep gets squeezed, between these two moments, just in my desire to just get that calm and peaceful time.
And it's and then you end up either sleeping several times a day or trying to survive on 4 hours of sleep. Which isn't very healthy. No, not very good. Not very good. Okay, so back to special interests a little bit. I'm kind of, I know it's weird to be focusing on, because I also do want to celebrate special interests as something wonderful that we have, but at the same time, I feel like we also need to acknowledge that flip side, where special interests become unhealthy, become maybe kind of a genuine problem. So what happens when conspiracy theories become a special interest, or when particular social fora become special interests? I have certainly seen examples where, for example, the incel community became a special interest. And that person just dives off into that. And it's very hard to know how to help. Because obviously when you're in a special interest, it takes up your entire mind, and there's no way of quitting that. And but sometimes those special interests really are potentially very harmful and can instill ideas that are not going to be good for your life.
It's something that I actually worry about almost on a daily basis, to be honest, especially with not wanting to be too gendered, but especially with young autistic boys, who, as you say, with the incel movement in particular, and it's, very clear and almost pretty transparent links to, very dark political places, on forums such as Reddit and, the chans, 4chan, 8chan, all those kind of things. Never actually been on them, but, you kind of learn about them through osmosis, just because of the kind of nefarious impact they have on everything else.
You can't help it.
Indeed.
They infiltrate all the other parts of the internet.
They do, like a kind of like a black mold almost. It's really quite unpleasant. But yeah, something I worry about an awful lot, because one thing I know about my special interests is that I'm enormously defensive of them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so for example, to bring the Titanic once again back into view, if anyone ever says anything about the Titanic which I know to be false or a myth or whatever, you know, I have to set that straight. You know, I have to defend its honor almost. Yeah. And you know, I think with something like the Titanic, that's benign. That's not going to cause any problems, not really, other than probably alienating my friends. You know, that's the worst thing that's going to happen there.
And you can bring the evidence.
Yes, indeed. As long as you've got that kind of, you know, the fact basis. But if your special interest is, for example, you know, a conspiracy theory that is grounded in nothing more than other people's ideas that are provably false, and you find yourself, you know, it's that thing where you dig in. You know, you entrench yourself, because if that is your special interest and you feel the need to defend, you know, your belief that, I don't know, the world is flat, as a very basic example, then you know, that is going to spiral very, very quickly, because we all know that once we start to, you know, dig down like that, you know, it becomes almost impossible then to be rescued from that. You know, you are going to just become deeper and deeper, you know, embedded into it.
It does, and I think most people's reaction to seeing that happening is, I'm going to try to save you by proving that you're wrong. And you know, I'm going to try to prove to you that the earth is round, so then you will stop believing in this conspiracy theory, and then things will be better. And that approach just never works, because there is that defensiveness. It's like trying to convince, it's like an atheist trying to convince a religious person, or vice versa. Or it's like, you know, a socialist trying to convince a conservative. It doesn't work, because there's just
fundamental incompatibility.
Yeah, completely. And I mean, I honestly don't know what to do. You know, I'm one of those people that it's supposed to be my job to be able to help in situations like that. But I find myself, you know, so far I've found the most useful thing to be non-judgmental listening. And just having them encounter someone who doesn't think that they're evil for believing this, but who asks perhaps friendly questions.
Yes, yeah. The make them, without the defenses coming up, make people.
Can you explain to me?
Yes.
Why you think this? And being willing to listen is really that important part, because I think you become combative when someone is attacking your special interest, because as an autistic person, your special interest becomes a part of your identity. It's something that is so profoundly attached to you that, you know, you're not just attacking the conspiracy theory, you're attacking me. And so I guess that was another tangent. I think we should be maybe moving on to Thing of the Day.
Sure, we can do Thing of the Day. Pete, you're going to present Thing of the Day today, because it is your book that just came out last week.
Yes, indeed. So yes, my Thing of the Day is my first book, my debut, you know, maiden voyage book, which is called What I Want to Talk About, which is basically me talking about my favorite special interests for 8 chapters.
Yay!
You know, I managed to get a publisher to take seriously my idea of just offloading everything I know about these 8 different topics. But the way that it works is that though each chapter is very much dedicated to a particular special interest that I've had, you know, maybe not all my life, but, you know, a big one that's very important to me in some way, I use it as a kind of sneaky way to talk about autism generally. you know, and just to get that kind of heightened awareness and understanding of what autism is and how it works, certainly, you know, from my point of view, across to people. So, for example, in my, I do a chapter about my love of superheroes, you know, so kind of, you know, Marvel comics, films, that kind of stuff, fairly late in the book. I think it's chapter 7. And that's my way of talking about the kind of phenomenon of autistic people being very passionate about justice and about fair play and things like that, you know, that kind of desire that many autistic people have, that, you know, everything has to be totally reasonable, you know, and that anything that's even veering on unreasonable or worse, criminal, is just completely unacceptable, you know. So yeah, I kind of, you know, link things in like that. And my chapter on music, for example, which is based on my experience of being in a band when I was in my 20s, that's all about how special interests can give you the impetus to push beyond your boundaries. Sometimes, you know, if the interest is sufficient and you're passionate enough about it, you can find yourself doing things that otherwise you would never have been able to do. Like in my case, you know, being on stage and singing, which even, you know, now I'm looking back into, you know, nearly 40 years old, I'm looking back thinking, I don't know how I ever did that. You know, I cannot, it's so strange. But I had such a passion for what we were doing, you know, for the music we were making and for music generally, and, you know, playing guitar and songwriting, that I almost didn't think about it. I just did. You know, I just got on stage and did it because I just had to. You know, it became something that I just had to do. So that's quite interesting, although it's because again, you know, things like that aren't typically seen as the stereotypical autistic special interests. You know, you don't, for whatever reason, even now.
And it's weird because there are so many autistic artists.
So many, you know, but it still hasn't kind of punctured through to the kind of general public's perception of autism, which is so strange. Because, you know, you think about Courtney Love, Gary Newman, you know, some
Anthony Hopkins.
Anthony Hopkins, yeah, famously. You know, the arts are teeming in autistic people. Yeah,
absolutely.
Whether they know it or not. And yeah, I really wanted to, you know, pierce that bubble a little bit and make it clear that, yes, you know, there are plenty of autistic musicians out there, autistic comedians, autistic actors, etc.
All the theater kids, come on. And I think it really does broaden your skill set. Like you said, like everything that I learned from theater. And I remember my parents saying, well, you can't do theater if you're not keeping up at school, if you're not doing this stuff. So I had to get organized and develop some rudimentary executive functioning skills so that I could spend all of my time outside of school doing theater.
Yeah. And of course, we're acting all the time anyway, aren't we? You know, I mean,
we all deserve Oscars.
Absolutely.
Really do.
I mean, that was the central point of one of my, well, I think my most successful YouTube video was like, we deserve Oscars for the masking that we do every single day. I can't help but think about when you're talking about music and as a special interest for autism, what do you think art brings to us? Because obviously art is a form of expression, and you know, I think most teenagers, regardless of their neurotype, you know, they go through some phase where art gives them something special. But as you say, it's not something we usually connect with autism. And yet I find that at least half of the young kids and teenagers that I see, they engage in some form of art.
Yes. Yeah.
At least half, if not more. What do you think? Why is art such a driving force, and why is it such a common special interest?
It's a good question. I mean, I'll answer from my experience, you know, and my limited experience of, you know, students that I've worked with, you know, as a teacher. I think a lot of it comes down to two things, certainly for me. One is the urge to create, which I think is something that is huge in my case, and barely even understood. I never stop to think about why it is, but there's this kind of imperative that I have to be, coming up with something new or something creative at some point. All my life, it's either been drawing or writing or building things or models or those video games like Minecraft, where you're always kind of making things happen, and it's something that I've never been able to shake, and that is one of the very few things in my life that makes me relaxed.
Yes.
I find relaxation tremendously difficult. And I don't know whether that's an autistic thing or an ADHD thing. It's probably a combination.
Probably an anxiety thing too.
And yes, gosh. Indeed, almost certainly. But it's a vicious circle because it heightens the anxiety. It just gets worse and worse. But if I'm letting off a little bit of energy, that kind of energy into creating something, then the levels of anxiety and the ability to relax kind of comes back a little bit. The anxiety drops and the relaxation goes up, rises. And that becomes something that's, quite not so much addictive, but something you want to chase. It's a nice feeling. It's a good feeling to have that kind of, when you don't experience relaxation much, when you finally get it, it's a big deal. So that's a big driving force for me, I think. But I also think with the creativity that there's an aspect of control, yes, which in itself sounds terrifying and horrible, and it's often something that's driven at autistic people, isn't it? We get accused of being control freaks, don't we, of always wanting to be in control of everything, and I hate that, because usually it's just a way of just trying to survive, just trying to cope in a stressful world,
unpredictable world. Yeah,
exactly.
It lowers anxiety.
Exactly.
Being in control of your environment lowers your anxiety.
It does. It does. So it's actually, it makes perfect sense that we want that. And I think, creative endeavors, writing music, even just listening to music and choosing what you're going to listen to or read, it's a form of exerting that small amount of control that we're actually able to on the world. In order to feel that we have some agency, that we're not just buffeted around by the people around us, especially people pleasers like myself, who are literally buffeted around, just pillar to post by what other people want me to do, I'll do that now. Okay, I'll do that now. Okay, I'll do that. It's nice to just say, no, actually, I'm going to stop now. I'm going to do something for myself. I'm going to create a thing. And that's me just putting a little bit of expression on the world and just, a tiny modicum of control over my surroundings, which goes a long way to, rescuing your mental health, I think.
Especially for children and teens who are micromanaged in so many ways, having the ability to create.
No, I agree.
I saw that with, when you get the students, and I was one of these myself, who doodle as a matter of course, and that's a creative endeavor, and it's just stamping just a little bit of control over something they have no control over at all, where they're told what to do all the time. Well, actually, I'm just going to draw these pictures because that's something that I can actually decide upon for myself, and which is why I would never stop anyone doodling if they're listening to me and I'm teaching or talking. You doodle away, I'm
exactly.
Fine.
Pete, I had a student, I have to tell you a couple Titanic stories. I had a student who similarly had expertise in the Titanic, and every piece of work, if he did work at all, it had to have the Titanic involved. And then it was also outside of class time. He created like a comic strip that was basically, what's it called? A storyboard of the Titanic movie. So, but it was like in Diary of a Wimpy Kid style cartoonish drawings, but it was the whole movie, including the scene where she's nude in the car, but he put like a bar over her unmentionables. And my laughter went on and on. And then I took my class on a field trip, and we went to old by Canadian standards, an old theater, downtown to see a show, and they had very old-fashioned elevators, and I figured some of my students would likely be interested in this. So we got in the old-fashioned elevator, and they had the elevator operator, and my Titanic expert goes, "This is the same elevator that was in the Titanic." And I'm going, "Oh, it's probably similar." Yeah, and the operator turned around and looked and said, oh my goodness, this was made by the same company the next year.
Wow.
The next year.
Wow.
And I was just, my jaw dropped. But of course, I wasn't actually that surprised because his expertise was pretty profound.
Yeah. Well, that's it, isn't it? But also that attention to detail and just noticing things.
Right away, instantly.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
That's
I love
amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
I think adults very often get shocked when they meet autistic children.
Yes.
And those autistic children, who aren't masking yet, who just blurt out that information that they know, or, and there's those two different reactions, one being awe and one being
defensiveness, because it's like you're undercutting my power.
Yeah. Or like, does no one just love this kid? Why is this kid, learning the alphabet so young? Or why are they, why do they know all of these things? It must be because their parents are driving them towards only intellectual pursuits, and something is wrong. And it's just autistic nature, I think, to gather information. Like I am incapable of playing a computer game without having Excel sheets of information organized. Like, I need it. It's not that that's the right way to play the game, but World of Warcraft, Sims. I think, no, Civilization, I don't have Excel sheets for. I could, but I don't. But we need that organization of knowledge, I think, and that
and the deep dive.
Yeah. Oh, that's the other thing about special interests, isn't it, Pete? Like, if someone asks you about your special interest, you will never shut up.
Well, yeah, indeed. Well, that's the natural state, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've been kind of browbeaten into not doing that, but those few times where, you do feel that you're able to. And I found this writing the book, where I was suddenly thinking to myself, am I actually allowed to now talk in depth about video games from the late 1990s? Yeah. And I was like, yes, I actually can. I really can now talk in some detail about the Banjo-Kazooie on the N64, and no one's going to stop me. So I just did, and it was the most wonderful feeling, because apart from when you've got those particular friendships where you can go into that kind of depth with a topic, I've got a friend where I can talk about music, to the nth degree. Apart from those few times, you're never really able to do that, because, as you said, people are, even as adults, people are kind of discombobulated a little bit when you show that depth of passion and understanding of something. It's but whenever I get the chance, I just love it. It's the most wonderful feeling of kind of its release and its enjoyment and its acknowledgement as well, and belonging, that somebody wants to listen, someone's interested. And I always say, one of the best gifts any adult or a particular teacher can give to an autistic student is to listen to them talk about their interests. It really is a huge thing, massively positive thing.
Yeah. And to, I think, encourage us to find our nerds out there in the world. Like,
find your people. Yeah.
Like, I've been able to connect with people through music, certainly, but I never found those people who were interested in it the way I was interested in it. Then I got into role-playing games, and in role-playing games, for some reason, I found those nerds, because like I could connect with people on that, and now, of course, in psychology. And I think, Pete, this is something that I hope really happens to you when you meet some of those new autistic friends that you've made over the pandemic that you told me about.
Yeah.
So I have a friend who is an autistic psychologist. He lives a little bit far away. In Danish terms, Kara, yes. We don't usually drive 6 hours here to go and meet someone. But when we do meet each other, we can spend hours and hours and hours and hours talking about psychology together.
Yeah.
And there's never that sense of, oh no, am I boring the other person?
Yeah. That's the real joy. That really is.
It is. And I think that's what we meet in other autistic people is like that mutual passion and excitement for knowledge and for weird interests and for, you know, just letting go and being fully autistic, authentically us.
The other joy is like being like, hey, here's this fun fact or this deep dive that I did. And you just send the one message and you might not speak for another 4 days and it's totally fine. You never have to end a conversation. And I love that. I find that so refreshing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just like, you know, it's fine. You know, you know that you're going to talk again. You know, there's no need for that kind of, you know, signing off or anything like that, which is just a breath of fresh air. You know, it's great.
Absolutely. Oh, it's autistic friendships are wonderful. And I hope for every autistic person out there that they find an autistic friend with enough of a shared profile or enough of a shared interest that they can have this connection. Because I certainly know that when I find those people, those friendships are life-giving.
They are. We usually like to ask a random question as well to wrap things up. I haven't quite thought of one yet, but it's coming. It's coming. All right. If you could enter the world of any of your special interests at no risk to your personal health and safety, and you could come back at any time, what would you like to engage in?
Can I give two?
Of course. I'm not going to limit your answer.
I was going to say, I mean, there's no real need for rules, is there?
No.
Just because I've got, there's one which is a childhood thing, which I remember vividly. And I'm saying this here surrounded by my Lego collection, which is mostly kind of, you know, buildings and vehicles and things like that. That I used to spend hours as a kid just wishing I could be like Lego person size, just so that I could walk around the Lego world, you know, just like experience what it must be like. So that's something I would love to do, you know, like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Do you remember that film? I used to just have, you know, daydreams of being shrunk to maybe just a little bit bigger than that and just walking around my Lego city, you know, like climbing into the Lego police car. I mean, it wouldn't move, but, you know, to be fun.
There's a video game called Grounded that you have to play that is basically like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Grounded, really? Look it up. Yeah, it's amazing. Grounded. It's so much fun.
Okay, I'm definitely looking at that. I mean, I love that. There was that video game on the, you know, this is back in the early 90s, but Micro Machines, where you'd be racing in the little cars on like kitchen work surfaces and things. Love that kind of stuff. But more recently, if I could inhabit a world with no danger to myself, then I think it would probably have to be Minecraft. You know, if I was playing it on creative, if you know, actually, no, I wouldn't want to play on creative because I'd want to farm and explore, but no baddies, you know, no monsters, no minions, you know, but that freedom, you know, well, let's face it, it's a world that's empty with no one else there. And there are times where I would love that. You know, I mean, people said that I Am Legend, you know, the film with Will Smith was like a horror movie. And I was watching the first 20 minutes of that where he's alone in New York City thinking, whoa, yes, please. That would be amazing. You know, that would just be, you know, just that peace, you know, the animals grazing on the streets. I mean, obviously, to end up in that situation, there'd have to be some kind of awful catastrophe, which I don't want to wish for. But the idea of loneliness does not scare me at all. You know, that's not a frightening thing. So that kind of solitude and peace in Minecraft would just be wonderful. You know, just watching the square sun set over the square trees, eating my bowl of mushroom stew. That would be that would be good. That would be happy.
It's all you need, really.
Yeah, it is. It is all I've ever needed.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Pete. It has been such a pleasure, and I'm so glad that we've connected and we were able to pick your brain a little bit, and I'm sure it will not be the last time. We'll have you back again.
Yes, yeah, be very happy to indeed. Thank you very much. It's been really nice just talking about these aspects of special interests. I've found, you know, the times that I've done, you know, interviews and podcasts and things with other autistic people, the conversation can get so rich with insights and interesting, concepts and new ways of looking at things. It's always a real pleasure. So thank you very much.
We could probably do another 3 hours right now, but yeah.
Well, we'll certainly have you back for your other book.
Yes, that would be great. In the spring.
If at some point you just want to stop by and have a conversation about something random, we're here.
All the time. We're just on Zoom. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, we're just sitting here like 24/7.
Just wait.
like some episode of Black Mirror. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Right. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much too. Thank you. I'll see you again.
Autistic Tidbits Tangents.